The spring sun burned white over Pine Ridge Valley, carving shadows through the pines that ringed Crystal Lake like sentinels guarding a secret. Marcus Reed sat motionless in his weathered fishing boat, the kind with peeling green paint and a motor that coughed more than it purred, watching his line disappear into water, so transparent he could count the stones 15 feet below. The air tasted clean, carried the sharp bite of snowmelt from the mountains still capped in white despite May's warmth. Silence owned this place. Not the empty quiet of loneliness, but the fullness of a world that had forgotten to need anything from him. On the wooden dock 60 yards behind him, Dylan sprawled on his stomach, elbows propped, nose buried in a library book about experimental aircraft. The boy's legs kicked absently, sneakers worn at the toes, laces perpetually undone, no matter how many times Marcus reminded him. 9 years old and already disappearing into worlds built from blueprints and thrust equations the same way his father once had. Marcus checked his watch without meaning to. 3:15, another hour before they'd need to head back clean the day's catch if they'd caught anything start dinner. Routine held them together, had for 6 years now, ever since the world stopped making sense. The fishing line jerked. Marcus felt it through his palm before he saw it, that electric pull of something alive testing the limits of its new prison. He stood slowly, knees protesting the stillness, and began to reel in. The rod bent the kind of curve that meant something worth keeping. Dylan glanced up from his book, interest flickering across his face, then returned to whatever page held him captive. The sky tore open, not metaphorically. The sound came first, a mechanical shriek that didn't belong to this valley. This quiet afternoon, this life Marcus had so carefully constructed from the wreckage of his old one. He looked up and saw the private jet carving an impossible angle through the blue trailing black smoke from its starboard engine like a banner announcing catastrophe. The aircraft wasn't supposed to be there. Flight paths didn't cross Crystal Lake. The valley sat too remote, too irrelevant to matter on any map that counted. But physics didn't care about maps or regulations or the sanctuary Marcus had built. The jet tilted further, gravity claiming what lift had abandoned, and plunged toward the water, 200 yards from where Marcus stood frozen in his boat. Impact shattered the afternoon. The sound hit him in the chest, a percussion of metal and velocity meeting liquid resistance. Water exploded upward, a geyser that caught the sunlight and turned it into diamonds before collapsing back into chaos. The jet's tail section jutted from the surface at an obscene angle, already sinking, already doomed. Marcus didn't think. Thinking was what engineers did, what he used to do, mapping consequences and calculating risk. This was something older, something that lived in muscle memory and adrenaline. He dove. The cold stole his breath. Crystal Lake earned its name from snowmelt that never quite warmed even in summer's peak. His body screamed protest, but he kicked deeper, following the white foam trail of disturbed water toward the sinking cockpit. Visibility vanished in the murk of jet fuel, spreading like an oil slick through the clarity, turning the lake into a brown fog that tasted of chemicals and disaster. His lungs began to burn. The pressure built behind his eyes and his temples, that familiar countdown before the body demanded air regardless of will. He pushed through it, arms sweeping the darkness, searching for metal, glass, anything solid. His knuckles scraped against something sharp. The cockpit window, already fractured from impact, spider-webbed cracks spreading across reinforced glass. Through the brown haze, he could barely make out a shape inside a person slumped against the controls, dark hair floating in the water that had already flooded the cabin. Marcus grabbed the window frame and pulled. The wreckage shifted, settling deeper. No time for careful. He braced his feet against the fuselage and yanked at the shattered glass, felt it give, felt the edges slice into his palms, but didn't stop. The opening widened enough. He thrust his arms through and grabbed fabric, a suit jacket, and hauled. The woman came free all at once, dead weight in his grip. Marcus wrapped one arm around her chest and kicked for the surface, following the light that seemed impossibly far above. His vision started to tunnel. Black spots danced at the edges. The woman's body dragged against him, heavier than physics said she should be, but he locked his arm tighter and kept kicking. They broke the surface together. Marcus gasped, water streaming from his face, and immediately tilted the woman's head back to clear her airway. She wasn't breathing. Pale skin, lips already blue, no pulse he could feel through his own racing heartbeat. The shore. He needed solid ground. Marcus swam one-armed, the woman's head cradled against his shoulder, kicking with everything left in legs that had gone mostly numb from the cold. The distance felt infinite, but couldn't have been more than 40 yards. His boat drifted somewhere behind him, forgotten. Dylan stood on the dock now, book abandoned, face white with shock. Marcus's feet found mud and he staggered upright, dragging the woman onto the rocky beach. He laid her flat, checked her airway again, and started compressions. 30 counts, 2 breaths. The training came back from some certification he'd taken a decade ago for reasons he couldn't remember now. 30 counts, 2 breaths. Her chest rose and fell with his efforts, but she didn't respond, didn't cough, didn't show any sign the oxygen was reaching wherever it needed to go. 30 counts, 2 breaths. Her body convulsed. Water erupted from her mouth and she twisted onto her side, coughing violently, each spasm racking her entire frame. Marcus pulled back, giving her space, watching as color slowly crept back into her face. She gasped, a raw sound of someone remembering how to breathe, and her eyes opened. Dark brown eyes, confused, focused on his face with an intensity that felt almost accusatory, as if his presence required explanation. Her lips moved. No sound came out at first, just the working of vocal cords trying to remember their function. Then barely a whisper, hoarse from lake water and trauma. "You pulled me out." Not a question. A statement of fact, processing information, cataloging reality. Marcus didn't answer. What was there to say? He studied her face instead, took inventory. Early 40s, professional even in catastrophe, the kind of bone structure that photographs well. A bruise already forming on her left temple, a cut along her jawline, still weeping blood mixed with lake water. Expensive suit, or what was left of it. The fabric felt quality even soaked through. In the distance, sirens began their approach. Someone must have seen the crash, called it in. The valley had cell service if you climbed to the ridge, and plenty of hikers liked the view up there. "Don't try to talk. Help is coming." The woman's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Surprising strength for someone who'd been dead 30 seconds ago. Her eyes locked onto his. "Who are you?" Marcus gently pried her fingers loose. "Doesn't matter. You're safe now." Her gaze shifted past him to the lake, where her aircraft's tail section had already vanished beneath the surface. Bubbles still rose, marking the grave. She shuddered, a full-body tremor that had nothing to do with cold. Dylan appeared at Marcus's elbow, slightly out of breath from running the length of the dock. The boy's eyes were huge, processing the scene, the woman, his father, soaking wet and bleeding from a dozen small cuts. Marcus put a hand on his son's shoulder, grounding them both. "It's okay, bud. She's going to be fine." The sirens grew louder. The first emergency vehicle appeared at the ridge, red and blue lights strobing through the trees, followed by 2 more. The cavalry arriving to handle what Marcus had already handled. He stood, water streaming from his clothes, and took a step back. "Dad, you're hurt." Marcus looked down at his hands. Blood mixed with lake water dripping steadily from cuts he hadn't felt during the rescue. Nothing serious. Nothing that mattered. The woman tried to sit up. Marcus knelt beside her again, a hand on her shoulder. "Stay down. Let the paramedics check you over." "I need to know your name." Marcus shook his head. "You need to rest." EMTs burst onto the beach equipment, clanging radios crackling with dispatch chatter. They swarmed the woman with professional efficiency, checking vitals, wrapping her in thermal blankets, already loading her onto a backboard. One of them, a young guy with a buzz cut, glanced at Marcus. "You the one who pulled her out?" Marcus nodded. "Brave or crazy? Probably both. You should get checked too, those cuts." "I'm fine. Take care of her." The EMT opened his mouth to argue, but his partner called for help securing the backboard, and he turned away. Marcus watched them work, watched them load the woman into the ambulance, watched her head turn to look at him one last time, before the doors closed and they drove away. Sirens fading back up the mountain road. Silence returned, not the peaceful kind from before, the broken kind, fragile, temporary, waiting to shatter again. Dylan's hand found his. Small fingers still sticky from whatever candy he had snuck from the cabin before they'd left for their fishing trip. Marcus squeezed gently. "Can we go home now?" Home. The cabin waited where they'd left it, perched on the hillside overlooking the lake, smoke probably still drifting from the breakfast fire Marcus hadn't properly extinguished. Home meant safety, meant routine, meant the careful distance he'd maintained from everything that could hurt them again. "Yeah, let's go home." The sun had shifted lower by the time they climbed the path from the lake boots, squelching with every step, leaving dark prints on the wooden porch. Marcus stripped out of his wet clothes on the deck, hanging them over the railing to dry, while Dylan disappeared inside to change. The cuts on his hands had mostly stopped bleeding, looked worse than they were angry red lines that would heal clean if he kept them dry. Inside the cabin smelled like pine and old paper, exactly the way it always smelled. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains Sarah had hung 6 years ago. The fabric yellowed now, but still doing its job, softening the afternoon glare into something gentler. Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment, dripping onto the worn welcome mat, just breathing. This space held them, sheltered them, asked nothing except that they exist within its walls, and occasionally remember to split more firewood before winter came calling. He padded barefoot to the bathroom, found the first aid kit under the sink where it had lived since they'd moved in, and began cleaning the cuts. Hydrogen peroxide stung more than the original injuries, but he worked methodically, dabbing each laceration, wrapping gauze around the deeper ones on his palms. His reflection stared back from the small mirror above the sink, a face he barely recognized some mornings. 35, but the eyes belonged to someone much older. Someone who'd learned that the world didn't reward doing the right thing. The television murmured from the living room. Dylan must have turned it on. Marcus finished bandaging his hands and walked out to find his son curled on the ancient sofa, remote in hand, flipping through channels with the restless energy of a 9-year-old who'd seen too much for one afternoon. The news caught his attention. Aerial footage of Crystal Lake filled the screen, shot from a helicopter circling the crash site. Dive teams swarmed the water Coast Guard boats, forming a perimeter, officials in hazard suits, gesturing at recovery equipment. The banner across the bottom read, "Billionaire CEO survives jet crash in Montana wilderness." Marcus's hand found the remote before he consciously decided to move. The television died mid-sentence, the anchor's urgent tones cutting to silence. Dylan looked up at him, question written across his face. "I thought you'd want to know who she was." Marcus set the remote down on the coffee table carefully as if it might break. "Doesn't matter who she is." "But you saved her life. That's kind of a big deal, Dad." "It's what anyone would have done." Dylan's eyes, so much like Sarah's, it hurt to look at them, sometimes studied him with an understanding that 9-year-olds shouldn't possess. "Mom would say you were a hero." The words landed like stones. Marcus sat down on the sofa, suddenly exhausted, suddenly aware of how cold he still felt, despite the dry clothes. He pulled Dylan against his side, felt the boy's warmth, his solidness, his reality. "Your mom would have jumped in first, knowing her." Dylan giggled, the sound breaking some of the tension. "Yeah, she would have." They sat together as the sun shifted across the floor, painting patterns through the lace curtains. Marcus let his mind drift, let the afternoon settle into memory, where it could be filed away with all the other things he preferred not to examine too closely. Heroes, in his experience, didn't get happy endings. They got complications, investigations, attention that exposed everything you'd worked to keep hidden. Better to be nobody. Better to let the billionaire CEO fly away in her medical helicopter and forget the face of the man who'd pulled her from the wreckage. His coffee had gone cold, but he drank it anyway, standing at the kitchen window, watching the lake return to its mirror surface, as if the afternoon had never shattered its peace. 6 years ago, Marcus had been someone else entirely. Someone with ambitions and a career trajectory and faith in systems designed to prevent disaster. That Marcus wore tailored shirts and owned 3 different types of coffee makers and had opinions about which Seattle neighborhood would appreciate fastest. That Marcus was dead as surely as Sarah was. The Marcus who remained knew how to split firewood and fix outboard motors and make pancakes from scratch on Saturday mornings. He knew the names of all 6 families who lived year-round in Pine Ridge Valley, knew which days Carl restocked the general store, knew that Dylan liked strawberry jam better than grape, but would eat either without complaint. He knew the different calls of a dozen bird species, could predict weather by the color of the sky, could find peace in silence. He'd built this life deliberately, brick by careful brick, creating walls that kept the past where it belonged. The phone rang, the landline, because cell service existed only as rumor up here, unless you climbed the ridge. Marcus stared at it, watching it ring, counting. 4, 5, 6. The answering machine clicked on his own voice from years ago, asking callers to leave a message. No one spoke, just breathing, then a soft click of disconnection. wrong number probably, or a telemarketer who'd wandered off script. Marcus returned to the window. The lake reflected the sky's deepening blue as evening approached. Somewhere down there, recovery teams were pulling pieces of a private jet from the bottom, cataloging evidence, beginning the investigation that would determine what had gone wrong at 30,000 feet. He didn't need to see the reports to know what they'd find. Mechanical failure, most likely, a flaw in some critical system, something that should have been caught during routine maintenance but wasn't because companies cut corners and regulators looked the other way, and engineers who tried to speak up got silenced. The bitter taste of old anger rose in his throat. He swallowed it down, practiced and familiar with the motion. Dylan appeared beside him, pressed his face against the window glass. The boats are still out there. They will be for a while, lots to recover. Do you think she's okay? The lady, Marcus thought about the way her eyes had focused on his face, sharp and assessing even in trauma. The strength in her grip when she grabbed his wrist, the way she demanded his name as if she had any right to it. She's tougher than she looks. She looked pretty tough to me. Despite everything, Marcus smiled. Fair point. They made dinner together, a simple pasta with sauce from a jar of garlic bread that Dylan insisted on making himself, even though he always used too much butter. They ate at the small kitchen table, talking about Dylan's model airplane project, about whether the fishing would be better tomorrow, about anything except the woman pulled from the lake or the news crews that would probably descend on the valley by morning. After dinner, after dishes, after Dylan's homework was checked, and his teeth were brushed and the ritual of bedtime stories was observed, Marcus sat alone on the porch in the gathering dark. The valley's night sounds began their symphony, crickets, the distant call of an owl wind through the pines. Stars emerged one by one, so many more than Seattle's light pollution ever allowed. Sarah used to joke that Montana had stolen all the stars from the rest of the country, hoarded them like treasure. He'd loved the work once. Aerospace engineering felt like touching the future, like being part of humanity's reach beyond gravity's prison. The precision of it, the way mathematics became motion, the transformation of ideas into machines that could defy everything evolution had designed human bodies to do. Flying shouldn't work, not really. Metal that heavy shouldn't lift off the ground. But understanding the principles, applying them correctly, building systems that functioned exactly as predicted, that was magic wearing an engineering degree. Kane Aerospace had recruited him straight out of graduate school. Top of his class, already published, already making noise about revolutionary hydraulic systems that could handle extreme stress conditions. They'd offered him everything, salary that made his father's jaw drop, benefits that seemed almost fictional, a lab budget that meant he could actually test his theories instead of just simulating them. He'd taken the job without hesitation. Sarah had already been pregnant with Dylan, glowing with it, planning nurseries and interviewing pediatricians and reading parenting books with the same intensity she brought to everything. The future had seemed vast and bright and entirely within their control. God, they'd been stupid. Marcus stood stretched, felt his 35-year-old body protest the afternoon's exertion. The cuts on his hands throbbed, a dull ache that would be worse tomorrow. He should sleep. Morning would come early, and with it probably reporters, probably questions, probably attention he had no interest in receiving. Inside, he checked on Dylan one last time. The boy slept sprawled across his bed, covers kicked off, mouth slightly open, the picture of 9-year-old unconsciousness. Marcus pulled the blanket back over him, tucked it around his shoulders, and stood watching for a moment longer than necessary. This boy was his entire world now. Everything else was just maintenance, just surviving until Dylan was old enough to survive on his own. Marcus's own bed felt larger than it should. 6 years and he still slept on his side, leaving space for a ghost. Pathetic maybe, but some habits ran too deep to break. He lay in the dark, listening to the cabin settle, listening to his own breathing, listening to the silence that never quite managed to be silent enough. Sleep came eventually, fitful and thin, punctuated by half-dreams of sinking aircraft and cold water, and a woman's eyes asking questions he had no intention of answering. Morning arrived with the smell of coffee, automatic timer, doing its job, pulling him into wakefulness whether he wanted it or not. Marcus shuffled to the kitchen in sweatpants and yesterday's t-shirt, poured a cup into the dented percolator that had belonged to his father, and stood at the window watching the sun climb over the eastern ridge. The lake looked innocent, peaceful. No sign of yesterday's catastrophe except for a few official boats still anchored near where the jet had gone down. Recovery operations continuing, methodical and thorough. Somewhere in those depths lay the answers investigators needed, sealed in black boxes and twisted metal. Not his problem, not his responsibility. He'd done his part pulling the woman out. Everything else belonged to people with badges and authority and the institutional power to demand accountability. The television sat silent in the corner. Marcus had no desire to turn it on to see his lake plastered across cable news, to hear speculation about what had caused a private jet to fall from the sky in the middle of nowhere. But Dylan would be up soon, curious as always, and better to know what stories were circulating than to be blindsided. He hit the power button. The screen flickered to life mid-sentence, a different anchor than last night, but the same urgent tone, the same need to make disaster sound important. Miraculous survival of Victoria Kane, CEO of Kane Aerospace, whose private jet crashed into Crystal Lake yesterday afternoon. Kane was pulled from the wreckage by a local resident whose identity has not yet been released. Sources close to the investigation say the aircraft's black box has been recovered, and preliminary analysis suggests possible mechanical failure, though sabotage has not been ruled out. Marcus turned it off. The name hung in the air like smoke. Victoria Kane, Kane Aerospace. The coincidence felt deliberately cruel, the universe's particular brand of irony. Of course, the woman he'd pulled from the lake would be connected to the company that had destroyed his life. Of course, she'd be named Kane. Of course, he couldn't just save a random stranger and move on. The coffee tasted bitter. He drank it anyway, staring out at the lake, at the boats, at the evidence of a world that refused to leave him alone, no matter how far he ran. Dylan's footsteps on the stairs, the particular shuffle thump of a 9-year-old trying not to trip over his own feet. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair sticking up in 3 directions, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning, Dad. Is there breakfast?" Routine, safety and repetition. Marcus turned away from the window. "Pancakes sound good." Dylan's face lit up. "With chocolate chips. If we have any left. Pretty sure someone raided the pantry last week." "That wasn't me. Must have been a raccoon." "A raccoon with thumbs capable of opening Ziploc bags." Dylan grinned shameless. "Very talented raccoon." They fell into the familiar rhythm of breakfast preparation. Marcus mixed batter while Dylan set the table, poured orange juice into mismatched glasses they'd inherited from the previous cabin owner. The griddle heated, butter sizzling, and soon the kitchen filled with the smell of pancakes and domesticity. This was real. This mattered. Everything outside these walls could burn, and as long as he had this mornings with his son, simple food, simple peace, he could survive. They ate in comfortable silence, Dylan demolishing his stack with the efficiency of someone whose body constantly demanded fuel for growth spurts. Marcus picked at his own plate, appetite absent, but going through the motions anyway. The cuts on his hands made holding a fork awkward. Dylan noticed frown. "Do they hurt a lot?" "A bit. They'll heal." "You were really brave yesterday." Marcus set down his fork. "I was really there, that's all. Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone." The words echoed the woman's Victoria Kane's from yesterday. Marcus didn't like the symmetry. He changed the subject, asked about Dylan's model airplane, whether he'd solved the wing balance problem that had been frustrating him. Dylan launched into a detailed explanation involving lift coefficients and center of gravity that would have made any aerospace engineer proud. The kid had the instinct for it the way some children had perfect pitch. He understood flight on an intuitive level that couldn't be taught. Sarah would have been so proud. The thought came unbidden, unwelcome. Marcus pushed it away, focused on his son's animated explanation, nodded at the right moments, asked follow-up questions that kept the conversation safely in the present tense. After breakfast, after dishes were washed and put away, the rumble of engines came down the dirt road. Not the familiar sound of Carl's delivery truck or Ray's old pickup. Something heavier, multiple vehicles approaching with the confidence of people who belonged everywhere. Marcus stepped onto the porch. Dylan followed despite his motion to stay inside. 3 black Cadillacs emerged from the tree line, polished to a mere arm, shined completely out of place on the dusty mountain road. They moved in formation, professional, purposeful, and stopped in a line in front of the cabin. Dust rose in slow clouds, catching the morning light drifting through the spaces between pines. The lead car's door opened. A woman stepped out. She was tall, early 40s, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail so sharp it could have cut glass, charcoal blazer and slacks that probably cost more than Marcus's truck heels that had no business on gravel but somehow made it work anyway. A bruise marked her left temple, fading to yellow-green. A bandage covered her jaw, white against pale skin. But her eyes were steady, completely focused. The eyes of someone accustomed to having the most important thing in any room be whatever she decided to pay attention to. Victoria Kane walked forward. Her heels crunched on gravel, each step deliberate, measured the approach of someone who'd calculated exactly how this conversation would go. Behind her, two men emerged from the other vehicles. Dark suits, leather folders, tablets. The professional assistants of serious money. One held a thick envelope, the kind that contained checks with too many zeros. The other carried what looked like legal documents, multiple copies, ready for signatures. Victoria stopped 5 feet from the porch steps, extended her hand. "You saved my life. Then you disappeared before I could even thank you. I wanted to do that in person." Her grip was firm, professional, the kind of handshake that closed deals and ended arguments before they began. Marcus withdrew his hands slowly, keeping his expression neutral. "No need. I did what anyone would have done." Her lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, something more complicated. "Not anyone, Asahi. Most people would have filmed it and posted it before calling for help." The assistant with the envelope stepped forward, offered it with both hands like it was something sacred. "We'd like to offer compensation for your bravery, and we'll need you to sign a non-disclosure agreement, standard procedure for incidents involving the company." The words hit Marcus like cold water. NDA, standard procedure. The language of corporations protecting themselves, silencing inconvenient voices, buying cooperation with money, and legal threats. He'd signed one before. It had cost him everything that mattered. "I don't want money, and I don't sign things anymore." The silence that followed felt brittle. Victoria's head tilted slightly, studying him the way someone might study a puzzle with a missing piece. Her eyes narrowed not with suspicion exactly, but with recognition that this wasn't following the script she'd expected. "You're not curious why my plane went down? Not my business." It could have been sabotage. Someone might have tampered with the hydraulic systems. The word hydraulic hit Marcus like a physical blow. His jaw tightened just for a second before he could control the reaction. But Victoria's eyes were sharp. She'd seen it. Her gaze shifted past him into the cabin's open door. Marcus knew what she was seeing: simple furniture, handmade and sturdy. The stack of firewood beside the wood stove. The framed photo on the wall of Sarah holding baby Dylan, both of them smiling, captured in a moment before the world turned cruel. And next to it, pinned with thumbtacks to a corkboard, a series of technical drawings. Blueprints, schematics, clean lines, precise measurements, professional notations, and neat handwriting. Victoria stepped closer, 1 foot on the bottom porch step, eyes fixed on the corner of the nearest drawing where the logo was unmistakable. Kane Aerospace. The company name stylized the same design she'd seen on every document in her office for the past decade since taking over as CEO. Her breath caught. The professional mask cracked for just a moment, showing something underneath. Shock, maybe. Or understanding. Or guilt. The expression vanished quickly, but Marcus had seen it, cataloged it, filed it away with everything else he tried not to think about. She looked back at him. His face was unreadable now, a mask of calm that didn't quite hide the tension in his shoulders and the way his bandaged hands had curled into fists. Neither of them spoke. The moment stretched fragile and loaded with things unsaid. Dylan appeared in the doorway, curious, clutching his model airplane in one hand. The boy's eyes went wide at the sight of the Cadillacs, the suited men, the woman who'd been pulled from the lake. "Dad, who are they?" Marcus's expression softened immediately, the hardness draining away. "Just people passing through, bud. Go back inside." Dylan hesitated, looking between his father and Victoria, sensing the tension, even if he couldn't name it. Then he nodded and disappeared into the cabin footsteps, retreating up the stairs to his room. Victoria looked at the empty doorway, then back at Marcus. Something shifted in her eyes. Recognition, definitely. But also something else. Respect, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding that this was more complicated than a simple rescue and thank you. She nodded slowly, as if some internal decision had been made. "Thank you again, Mr. Reed. If you ever need anything, you know how to reach me." She'd used his name, he hadn't given it, which meant she'd already investigated, already knew exactly who'd pulled her from Crystal Lake, already understood at least some of what connected them beyond yesterday's accident. Marcus didn't respond. What was there to say? Victoria turned and walked back to the lead Cadillac, movements still precise despite the injuries, still projecting control, despite everything. Her assistants followed folders, unopened envelope, unoffered, their mission incomplete, in ways they probably didn't understand. The Cadillacs reversed down the narrow road, engines purring, expensive and smooth tires, finding traction on gravel that would have challenged lesser vehicles. They disappeared into the trees as smoothly as they had arrived, dust settling in their wake, silence returning. Dylan stepped back onto the porch, book forgotten in his hand. Dad, why'd she come all the way out here just to say thank you? Marcus watched the space where the cars had been, where the dust was already dissipating in the morning breeze. She's from a different world, Dylan, not ours. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't that simple. Not anymore. The worlds had collided yesterday when that jet hit the water, and no amount of distance or denial would separate them again. The rest of the morning passed in an uneasy approximation of normal. Marcus split firewood behind the cabin, each swing of the axe a meditation, trying to work off the tension that had settled into his shoulders. Dylan retreated to his room with his models and his books, giving his father space the way he'd learned to do when Marcus's mood turned dark. By noon, the first news van appeared at the valley's entrance, too far away to see clearly, but visible as a white shape setting up equipment on the ridge. By 1 o'clock, there were 3 vans. By 2, Marcus counted 7. The vultures gathering, drawn by the scent of a story. Carl called from the general store around 2:30, his voice apologetic and strained over the crackling landline. Marcus, I'm real sorry about this. The press, they're everywhere. Setting up camp, asking questions. Folks don't know what to tell them. Marcus gripped the phone tighter. What are they asking? About you, about the rescue. They got hold of a video somehow. Hiker up on the ridge filmed the crash on his phone. Shows someone swimming out to the wreckage. Image is blurry, but they're calling you a hero. The word tasted wrong. I'm not. I know that. You know that. But they don't care about truth, Marcus. They care about story. And they're spinning one that's got folks talking. What kind of story? Carl hesitated. The pause spoke volumes. The kind that asks questions about coincidences, about a man living alone in the woods who just happens to be there when a billionaire's plane goes down practically on top of his property. The kind that wonders if maybe it wasn't quite the miracle everyone thinks. Marcus's vision tunneled. His free hand found the counter, gripped it hard enough to hurt. They think I had something to do with it. Some of them, not everyone, but enough that people are starting to wonder. I'm sorry, Marcus. I tried to shut it down, told them they were crazy, but it's fine, Carl, thanks for the warning. He hung up before Carl could offer more apologies. The walls of the cabin suddenly felt too close, pressing in the sanctuary, becoming a cage. This was how it happened. This was how they destroyed you. Not with proof or evidence or anything as clean as facts, with innuendo and speculation and the public's insatiable appetite for conspiracy. Marcus walked to the window, looked out at the lake. The official boats were gone now. Recovery, complete, investigation moving to labs and offices where experts would piece together the sequence of failures that had brought a private jet down. But the news vans remained on the ridge, cameras probably trained on his cabin, right now recording every movement, building narratives from footage of a man standing at his own window. The phone rang again. He let it go to voicemail. 3 times it rang that afternoon. 3 times the answering machine clicked on. 3 times no message was left. The silence after each call felt heavier than the ringing. By 4 o'clock, Marcus had to go to town. They were out of milk, nearly out of bread, and Dylan needed his allergy medication refilled. Normal life didn't pause for crisis. He climbed into his truck, Dylan beside him, and drove the familiar road into Pine Ridge Valley's only real intersection, where the general store, the garage, and a small medical clinic formed the social center of their sparse community. The news vans had multiplied. 10 now, maybe 12, parked along the main road like an occupying army. Reporters milled around the general store's entrance, cameras, ready looking for anyone who might have information worth broadcasting. Marcus recognized one from CNN, another from a local Seattle station. The rest were unfamiliar but interchangeable, all sharing the same hungry expression. He parked around back, hoping to avoid attention. Dylan stayed close as they entered through the rear door, the one Carl left unlocked for deliveries. The store felt different, tense. The usual handful of locals shopping for dinner supplies moved through the aisles with their heads down, avoiding eye contact, radiating discomfort. Marcus grabbed a basket and started collecting what they needed. Milk from the cooler, bread from the shelf, the allergy medication from behind the counter where Carl kept prescriptions. The pharmacist, an older woman named Helen who'd always been kind to Dylan, handed over the pills without meeting Marcus's eyes. He paid in silence, counted out cash, took his change. Carl stood behind the register, guilt written across his weathered face. Marcus, I want you to know I don't believe any of it. You're a good man. Everyone who actually knows you, they know that. But Carl glanced toward the front window where cameras were visible, prowling like predators. But people are scared. They don't understand what happened, and when people don't understand, they look for patterns. They create them if they have to. Marcus nodded. He understood. Fear made people stupid, made them abandon reason in favor of stories that felt right even when they made no sense. He'd watched it happen at Kane Aerospace, watched executives ignore evidence because acknowledging it would be expensive and complicated. Easier to blame the engineer who'd raised concerns. Easier to fire him and move on. Thanks for the heads up, Carl. He collected his bag and turned to leave. 3 people stood in the cereal aisle watching him. One of them, a woman he vaguely recognized from a Dylan school, pulled her daughter closer as he passed a subtle movement that the girl didn't understand, but Marcus felt like a slap. Outside, he loaded the groceries into the truck bed and buckled Dylan into the passenger seat. The boy was quiet, picking at a loose thread on his jacket, not meeting his father's eyes. You okay, bud? Dylan nodded without conviction. Some kids at school were talking about what people are saying about you. Marcus's chest tightened. What were they saying? That you're not really a hero, that maybe you did something bad. I told them they were wrong that you saved that lady's life, but he trailed off the thread, pulling free in his fingers. But they didn't believe you. Mrs. Patterson pulled me aside after lunch. Said I should probably stay home from school tomorrow. That things might be intense. Marcus gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white despite the pain it sent through his bandaged hands. They were coming after his son now. The rumors, the speculation, the casual cruelty of people who'd never bothered to know them. Dylan would pay the price for Marcus's past, for decisions made 6 years ago by men in suits who'd calculated the cost of human life against quarterly earnings. Mrs. Patterson might be right. We'll take a few days. Let this blow over. Will it blow over? The question hung unanswered because Marcus didn't have an answer that wasn't a lie. He started the truck, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove home in silence. The garage where he worked part-time sat on the edge of town, a squat building of corrugated metal and oil stains that Ray had run for 30 years. Marcus had picked up shifts there when they first moved to the valley, fixing engines because engines made sense, followed rules, responded predictably to proper treatment. Ray had given him a chance when no one else would, ask no questions about where Marcus had come from or why an aerospace engineer was content to rebuild carburetors. Ray stood in the open bay door when Marcus pulled up after dropping Dylan at home. The older man's face was apologetic but firm, the expression of someone about to deliver news he didn't want to give. Marcus, can we talk? They stood in the shade of the garage tools hanging on pegboards behind them, the smell of motor oil and solvent thick in the air. Ray pulled off his greasy cap, turned it over in his hands. Look, I don't believe what they're saying. You know that. You're good people. But my customers, they're uncomfortable. Had 3 cancellations today. Folks saying they don't want their vehicles worked on by someone mixed up in all this. Marcus nodded slowly. He'd known this was coming the moment Carl had called. You want me to take some time off? Just until things settle. A week, maybe 2. Let the news cycle move on to something else. People have short memories for this kind of thing. And if they don't, Ray's silence was answer enough. Marcus walked back to his truck, climbed in, sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. Through the windshield, he could see the mountains rising in the distance, the same mountains that had promised sanctuary 6 years ago. He'd thought geography could save them, that enough distance would create safety. But there was no running from this, no hiding from the machinery of public opinion once it started grinding. The grocery store was last. Dylan needed actual food, not just the basics from Carl's store. Marcus parked in the lot, grabbed a cart, and steeled himself for whatever was coming. The aisles felt hostile, every person he passed a potential accuser. He moved quickly, efficiently, grabbing items from his mental list without browsing. Near the register, two men in work jackets stood by the magazine rack. One of them, heavy-set with the beard, spoke just loud enough to be heard. Guy lives alone in the woods, no job anyone knows about, just happens to be there when a billionaire crashes. Come on, you don't have to be a detective. His companion nodded. Probably planned the whole thing. Maybe he's got debts, needed a payday. Save her life, play the hero, cash in on the reward. Marcus set his basket down on the counter with more force than necessary. Both men glanced over, the recognition flickering across their faces. Neither apologized, neither looked away. The cashier, a teenager who probably didn't even know what they were talking about, scanned items with trembling hands. Marcus paid, collected his bags, walked to the truck with his spine straight and his jaw clenched. He loaded the groceries, climbed into the driver's seat, and sat there breathing through the anger until his hands stopped shaking. The drive home took forever and no time at all. The cabin appeared around the final bend windows, glowing with the lamp Dylan must have turned on, smoke from the wood stove curling into the evening sky. Safe, familiar, rapidly becoming a prison. Inside, Dylan sat at the kitchen table picking at his dinner, a sandwich he'd made himself, uneven cuts and too much mustard. The boy looked up when Marcus entered, eyes red like he'd been crying, but trying to hide it. "Dad, why are people saying you're bad?" Marcus set the groceries down, moved to the table, pulled out a chair. He wanted to explain that the world didn't care about truth when a lie was more interesting, that people believed what they wanted to believe because it was easier than thinking that fear and stupidity made monsters out of good people. But those were adult problems, adult cynicism, things Dylan shouldn't have to learn at 9 years old. Instead, he reached across the table and squeezed his son's hand. Sometimes people get scared of things they don't understand. It'll pass. Dylan looked down at his plate, at the sandwich he'd barely touched. Will it? Marcus couldn't answer. Couldn't promise something he didn't believe himself. He stood, cleared the plates, turned off the kitchen light, and guided Dylan through the evening routine of homework and teeth brushing and bedtime stories, all the small rituals that created the illusion of normalcy. After Dylan fell asleep, Marcus sat alone on the porch in the darkness. The valley's night sounds had returned, crickets and wind and the distant call of an owl, but they felt hollow now, performance rather than peace. Headlights occasionally swept across the ridge where the news vans had set up camp, a distant reminder of the siege. His phone, the flip model he kept charged more from habit than expectation, buzzed in his pocket. A text message unusual enough to be notable. Unknown number. "Mr. Reed, we need to talk. VK. Victoria Kane. Somehow she'd gotten his number, which shouldn't have surprised him. People with her resources could find anything. Marcus stared at the message thumb hovering over the delete button. Engaging with her meant complications, meant connection to a past he'd spent 6 years trying to bury. But ignoring her meant letting the narrative spin out of control, meant letting speculation become fact through repetition. He typed a response. "Nothing to talk about." The reply came instantly. "There is. More than you know. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., the overlook past Miller's Point. Come alone." Marcus deleted both messages, turned off the phone, and sat in the dark, trying to convince himself he wouldn't go. He'd built this life on isolation, on refusing to engage with anything that could hurt them again. Meeting Victoria Kane would be stepping back into that world, acknowledging that the past wasn't actually buried no matter how much dirt he piled on top. But curiosity gnawed at him. What did she know? Why the secrecy? And underneath it all, the question that had haunted him for 6 years, had anyone at Kane Aerospace ever faced consequences for Sarah's death? Or had it all been buried under settlements and legal agreements just like they tried to bury him? Sleep eluded him that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the cabin settle to Dylan's breathing, from the next room to his own thoughts, circling endlessly. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the jet hitting the water, saw Victoria's unconscious face through the fuel-darkened lake, saw the technical drawings on his wall with the Kane Aerospace logo mocking him. By dawn, he'd made his decision. He would go. He would hear what Victoria Kane had to say. and then he would decide whether this was something he could walk away from or something that demanded he finally stop running. The sun rose slowly, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. Marcus made coffee, watched the day begin, and prepared himself for whatever came next. Dylan emerged from his room at 7:30, hair messy, eyes still heavy with sleep. They ate breakfast in near silence, neither willing to acknowledge the tension that had settled over their small household like ash. At 9:45, Marcus left Dylan with Mrs. Chen, their nearest neighbor, a grandmother who'd retired to the valley for the quiet and didn't mind watching a 9-year-old for a few hours. He drove up the mountain road toward Miller's Point, passing the news vans that had multiplied overnight. Reporters stood in clusters filming stand-ups, interviewing locals, building their stories from whatever material they could gather. None of them paid attention to his truck. He was just another local, another piece of scenery not worth their focus. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so bitter. Miller's Point overlooked the valley from 800 feet up, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that most tourists avoided. The overlook was empty when Marcus arrived, except for a single black sedan parked at the far end, engine off, windows tinted dark enough to hide whoever waited inside. Marcus pulled up 20 feet away, killed his engine, and sat. This was Victoria's meeting. She could make the first move. The sedan's rear door opened. Victoria Kane emerged dressed more casually than yesterday, but still expensive jeans that fit too well to be anything but designer, a leather jacket that probably cost more than Marcus's truck boots, built for looking good rather than hiking. The bruise on her temple had darkened overnight, the bandage on her jaw replaced with a smaller one. She walked to Marcus's truck, gestured for him to roll down the window. He obliged. "Thank you for coming. Not sure I had much choice. You don't strike me as someone who takes no for an answer." A slight smile. "Perceptive. Can we walk? This conversation shouldn't be had in cars." Marcus climbed out, followed her to the overlook's edge, where a wooden railing marked the boundary between earth and empty air. Below, the valley spread out like a painting crystal lake, a mirror reflecting clouds, the cabin a tiny speck barely visible among the pines. From up here, everything looked peaceful, manageable, a lie rendered beautiful by distance. Victoria stood beside him, hands in her jacket pockets, staring at the view without seeming to see it. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, deliberate, each word chosen with care. "I know who you are, Marcus Reed. I know you worked for my company. I know what happened to your wife. And I know that the system that killed her should never have been approved for production." The admission hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd expected denial to deflection, the corporate instinct to protect and obscure. Instead, she was laying it out cleanly, acknowledging what Kane Aerospace had spent 6 years pretending didn't exist. "You read the files. Every word, your warnings, the responses you received, the approval signatures. I know my uncle signed off on production despite your objections. I know the test flight that killed Sarah should never have happened. And I know the company paid you to disappear and keep quiet. Then you know why I don't want anything to do with Kane Aerospace or anyone connected to it." Victoria turned to face him fully. Her eyes were dark, serious, carrying something that looked almost like guilt. "I understand, but you need to know something else. My plane didn't crash because of mechanical failure. It was sabotaged. Someone cut the hydraulic lines. Someone tried to kill me." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Marcus felt his mind start racing, connecting dots he didn't want to connect. Hydraulic systems, sabotage, Kane Aerospace. The same patterns repeating, the same corners being cut, the same people making decisions that cost lives. Who? I don't know yet, but I have suspicions, and I need help proving them. I need someone who understands these systems, who knows how to read the evidence, who isn't compromised by company loyalty or corporate politics. I need someone who has every reason to want the truth exposed." Marcus shook his head, stepping back from the railing. "I'm not that person anymore. I'm out. I have a son to think about, a life that doesn't include any of this. Your life already includes this. The moment you pulled me from that lake, you were back in it. The press is already spinning conspiracy theories. Your reputation is being destroyed in real time. You can hide from it, or you can fight back with the truth. But ignoring it won't make it go away." She was right, and he hated her for it. The walls he'd built were crumbling, not because he'd chosen to tear them down, but because events had crashed through them like a jet through water. Running had stopped being an option sometime around the second news van. Why do you care? You're a billionaire CEO. You could bury this, make it go away, protect yourself in the company? Why come to me? Victoria's expression hardened. Because I'm tired of lies. Because I almost died and I want to know who tried to kill me. And because I've spent the last 2 days reading about what happened to your wife and realizing that my family's company destroyed your life to protect quarterly earnings. I can't fix what happened to Sarah, but I can make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. And I can give you something you've been denied for 6 years. What's that, justice? The word hit harder than Marcus expected. Justice. Not revenge, not compensation, but the simple acknowledgement that what had happened was wrong and those responsible should face consequences. He'd stopped believing in justice the day they had handed him the settlement check in the NDA, the day they'd made it clear that his wife's life had a dollar value and his career had a price. But here stood Victoria Kane offering to dismantle her own uncle's legacy, to expose her company's crimes, to give Marcus the one thing he'd convinced himself didn't exist anymore. What do you need from me? Victoria pulled a USB drive from her pocket, held it out. Everything you kept. Every email, every warning, every piece of documentation that proves you tried to stop what happened. I know you have it. Engineers like you, we don't delete evidence. We archive it. Marcus stared at the USB drive. She was right. He had kept everything backed up on drives hidden in the cabin insurance he'd never planned to use but couldn't bring himself to destroy. Admitting that felt dangerous, like opening a door he'd locked for good reasons. And if I give you this, what happens then? I take it to forensic engineers who aren't on my company's payroll. We build an airtight case. We present it to the FAA, to federal investigators, to anyone who'll listen. We force accountability. You'll destroy Kane Aerospace. Maybe, or maybe we save it by cutting out the cancer before it kills the whole organization. Either way, people need to know the truth, including me. Marcus looked out at the valley again, at the cabin where Dylan waited, at the life they'd built from ruins. Giving Victoria that evidence meant choosing sides, meant declaring himself an active participant rather than a passive victim. It meant teaching Dylan that standing up to power mattered even when it cost everything. It meant finally honoring Sarah's memory with more than just silent grief. I need to think about it. Victoria nodded, pocketed the USB drive. I understand, but don't take too long. Whoever sabotaged my plane, they're not going to stop just because I survived. And if they're willing to kill me to keep secrets buried, they won't hesitate to come after anyone else who threatens to expose them. The implications settled like ice in Marcus's gut. Dylan. They'd threaten Dylan if they knew Marcus had evidence, if they understood he could destroy them. The cabin that had felt like sanctuary suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable, a target anyone with resources could find. Victoria seemed to read his thoughts. I can provide protection, security, whatever you need to keep your son safe. I don't want your charity. It's not charity, it's basic decency, something my company should have shown you 6 years ago. Marcus turned away from the overlook, walked back to his truck. Victoria followed, maintaining distance, giving him space to process. At the truck door, he paused, hand on the handle. The USB drive. I don't have it with me. I know, when you're ready, you know how to reach me. He climbed into the truck, started the engine, and drove back down the mountain without looking in the rearview mirror. His hands were shaking. Whether from fear or anger or the weight of a decision he knew was already made, he couldn't say. The valley looked different on the drive back, not safer or more peaceful, but temporary. Like a dream he'd been having for 6 years that was finally inevitably coming to an end. The news vans had multiplied again, at least 20 now, transforming the main road into a media circus. Reporters shouted questions at anyone who passed, building narratives from scraps. Mrs. Chen's house sat a mile from Marcus's cabin, a small ranch-style home with a garden that produced vegetables all summer. Dylan was on her porch when Marcus pulled up, working on his model airplane with Mrs. Chen beside him, offering gentle guidance. The boy looked up, relief flooding his face. Dad, Mrs. Chen taught me how to fix the wing balance problem. Want to see? Marcus managed a smile. Show me at home, okay? Thank Mrs. Chen for watching you. The drive from her house to theirs took 3 minutes. 3 minutes during which Marcus wrestled with the decision that had already crystallized in his mind. By the time they pulled into the driveway, he knew what he had to do. Not because he wanted justice, though he did, but because Victoria was right. Hiding wouldn't protect Dylan anymore. The only way to keep his son safe was to end this completely and permanently by exposing everyone involved before they could strike back. Inside the cabin, Marcus went to his bedroom, pulled a lockbox from under his bed, and opened it with the key he'd kept on a chain around his neck for 6 years. Inside, wrapped in plastic, were 3 USB drives. Backups of backups, every email sent, every report written, every piece of evidence that proved he'd tried to save lives and been punished for it. He took one drive, left the others as insurance, and held it in his palm, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to contain so much destruction. Jobs would be lost, careers would end, a company his wife had admired might collapse. But people would also be held accountable. Safety regulations would tighten. Future engineers who saw flaws would speak up, knowing the system might actually listen. That had to be worth something. Marcus slipped the USB drive into his pocket and returned it to the living room where Dylan had spread out his model airplane project across the coffee table. The boy looked up, eyes bright with the enthusiasm only 9-year-olds could maintain through chaos. "Dad, I think I finally got it right. Want to help me with the final assembly?" Of course, they worked together as the afternoon sun shifted across the floor, father and son building something fragile and beautiful, something that would fly if they did it right. Outside, the world churned with speculation and malice. But in here, in this moment, they had glue and balsa wood and each other. It would have to be enough to carry them through whatever came next. Victoria's office occupied the 40th floor of Kane Aerospace's Seattle headquarters, glass walls offering views of Puget Sound that most people only saw in postcards. Tonight, the water looked black, restless, under clouds that threatened rain, but hadn't yet delivered. She sat alone at her desk, the building empty, except for security and cleaning crews, and opened the employee database with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. The search bar blinked, cursor expectant. She typed Marcus Reed. The file loaded slowly, deliberately, as if the system itself hesitated to reveal what it contained. Employment terminated following incident review. Ineligible for rehire. Standard corporate language that meant nothing and everything. Victoria clicked deeper and passed the sanitized summary into the personnel reports no CEO bothered reading unless forced. 7 emails emerged, each flagged with red exclamation points that someone had clearly ignored. Subject line screamed urgency. Hydraulic system. Critical failure. Risk. Immediate action. Required safety concerns. Escalated. She opened them, chronologically watched Marcus Reed's tone shift from professional concern to barely controlled alarm to resignation that no one was listening. The technical details meant little to her. She'd studied business, not engineering, but the pattern was unmistakable. A man had seen disaster coming, had documented it meticulously, had followed every protocol designed to prevent catastrophe. And somewhere up the chain, someone had decided profit mattered more than safety. She found the incident report buried 3 folders deep, password protected, plus with her executive credentials. Nevada test site, experimental aircraft system failure. 1 civilian fatality. The name appeared redacted in the official version, blackened out for privacy, but Victoria had root access. She clicked through layers of security until the truth appeared in 12-point font. Sarah Reed, wife of Marcus Reed, survived by husband and 1 minor child. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unable to move forward or back, trapped in the moment of understanding that the man who'd saved her life had lost his wife because her company, her family had chosen convenience over conscience. A knock shattered her focus. She closed the files with guilty speed muscle memory from a lifetime of corporate politics, where showing weakness meant vulnerability. Richard Kane entered without waiting for invitation. Her uncle at 62 still carried himself like someone who'd never been told no. Silver hair, immaculate despite the late-hour Navy suit pressed sharp enough to cut. He smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. "Working late again, Victoria." She forced her own smile, matching his artificiality with practiced ease. "The crash investigation requires attention." Richard crossed to the windows, hands in pockets, studying the city lights below, with the detachment of someone who owned enough of them not to be impressed. "I heard about your visit to the valley, to see the man who pulled you out. I wanted to thank him personally. It seemed appropriate." Of course, Richard turned from the window, face illuminated by the desk lamp's glow. but you should be careful. People talk and they're already making this more complicated than it needs to be. Victoria kept her voice neutral through effort. He didn't do anything wrong. He saved my life. I'm sure he did. Richard stepped toward the door, paused with his hand on the handle. The pause felt calculated, rehearsed. You're not digging into old personnel files, are you? The question landed soft as snow, but weighted with threat. Victoria met his gaze without flinching, years of boardroom experience keeping her expression blank. Why would I do that? Richard's smile widened fractionally. No reason. Just don't want you wasting time on ghosts when we have real problems to address. The FAA investigation, the media speculation, the stock price volatility. Those matter. Ancient history doesn't. He left. Victoria waited until his footsteps faded completely, until the elevator chimed his descent, until the silence confirmed she was truly alone. Then she reopened the files, hit print on everything, and watched the office printer spit out page after page of evidence that her family had built its fortune on calculated negligence. Rain began to fall as she left the building, carrying a briefcase now heavy with documents that could destroy Kane Aerospace and everyone associated with it, including her. Especially her. But somewhere in Pine Ridge Valley, a 9-year-old boy was going to bed without his mother because people in positions like hers had decided his family's suffering was an acceptable cost of doing business. That had to end, even if ending it meant she went down with the ship her father had built and her uncle had corrupted. Dylan Reed sat alone in the school cafeteria tray untouched, studying the pattern of scratches on the table's surface. Around him, the room buzzed with the controlled chaos of lunchtime voices bouncing off walls, trays clattering, the social hierarchies of elementary school playing out in who sat where and with whom. His usual table sat empty. The kids who'd been his friends last week now clustered 3 tables away, occasionally glancing in his direction with expressions Dylan had learned to recognize, even if he couldn't name them yet. Pity mixed with fear, mixed with the particular cruelty of children who'd discovered that association carried consequences. The cafeteria monitor, Mrs. Patterson watched from her position by the door. Not intervening, not helping, just observing with the passive concern of an adult who'd decided this was something Dylan had needed to navigate alone. Footsteps approached. Dylan didn't look up, didn't need to. He knew the sound of trouble coming. Hey, Reed, your dad figure out how to fake any more plane crashes. The voice belonged to Tyler Morrison, 12 years old and held back a grade, which made him both bigger and meaner than the average 6th grader. His friends flanked him, 3 boys who probably wouldn't have bothered Dylan on their own, but found courage in numbers. Dylan kept his eyes on the table. My dad saved someone's life. Yeah, after he probably sabotaged the plane in the first place. My mom says it's too convenient him being right there when it crashed. Says he's probably some kind of criminal. Heat rose in Dylan's chest, but he swallowed it down. Remembered his father's advice about fighting battles worth winning. Tyler Morrison wasn't worth anything except maybe detention if Dylan responded how his body wanted to respond. Your mom's wrong. Tyler's hand shot out, swept Dylan's tray off the table. Food splattered across the floor, chocolate milk spreading in a brown puddle sandwich, components scattering like shrapnel. The cafeteria went quiet, every eye turning toward the confrontation, watching to see what would happen next. Dylan stood slowly, fists clenched at his sides, 9 years of his father's lessons about walking away, warring with 9 years of being the kind of kid who couldn't stand injustice. Tyler was bigger, older, meaner, but he was also wrong, and sometimes wrong needed correction. Mrs. Patterson materialized between them before Dylan could make a mistake. Her hand on his shoulder, gentle but firm, guided him away from the mess, away from Tyler's smirking face, away from the watching eyes. Dylan, I think you should call your father to come get you. This isn't a good day for you to be here. The words confirmed what Dylan had been trying to ignore all morning. Even the teachers had decided he was the problem, the one who needed removal, the one who disrupted everyone else's normal. Not Tyler, not the kids spreading lies. Him. He called from the office phone, hands shaking with anger and humiliation and the particular injustice of being punished for someone else's cruelty. Marcus answered on the second ring, voice tight with concern. Dylan, what's wrong? Can you come get me? Mrs. Patterson says I should go home. The pause lasted 3 heartbeats, then quiet and controlled in a way that meant Marcus was very not controlled underneath. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Dylan waited on the bench outside the principal's office, backpack clutched to his chest, trying not to cry because crying would confirm everything the other kids thought about him being weak. The principal never appeared. Neither did Mrs. Patterson after making the initial suggestion. He sat alone with his shame and his anger and the growing understanding that the world was fundamentally unfair in ways his father had tried to protect him from learning. Marcus arrived in 8 minutes, still wearing his work clothes from the garage, grease stains on his jeans were etched across his face. He didn't ask questions in front of the school secretary, just signed the early release form and guided Dylan to the truck with a hand on his shoulder. They drove in silence for 2 miles before Dylan spoke. They said you're a criminal, that you made the plane crash. Marcus's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. People are scared. When they're scared, they say stupid things. Is it going to stop? The question hung unanswered because they both knew the truth. It wouldn't stop. Not without intervention, not without something changing the narrative that had already taken root. Dylan watched the valley pass outside the window, the mountains that had always felt like protection, now seeming inadequate against the kind of enemy that lived in rumors and speculation. At home, Marcus made hot chocolate despite the spring warmth, the ritual more important than the temperature. They sat on the porch while Dylan talked about Tyler Morrison and the scattered tray and Mrs. Patterson's suggestion that he'd be better off elsewhere. Marcus listened without interrupting, let his son spill the hurt and anger and confusion that 9-year-olds shouldn't have to process. When Dylan finished, Marcus set down his mug and pulled his son close. I'm sorry this is happening to you. You don't deserve it. None of this is your fault. But it's not your fault either. You saved that lady. You're a good person. I know, but sometimes being good isn't enough. Sometimes you have to fight back. Dylan pulled away enough to look at his father's face. Are you going to fight back? Marcus's expression shifted, something hardening behind his eyes. I'm thinking about it. In her penthouse apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, Victoria spread the printed files across her dining table like evidence at a crime scene. Coffee sat cooling beside her laptop, untouched, forgotten in favor of the documents that detailed 6 years of institutional failure. Her phone buzzed. James Morrison, head of security, his text brief and urgent. Preliminary crash investigation complete. Need to brief you immediately. This can't wait until morning. Victoria glanced at the clock, 11:30 p.m. Nothing that couldn't wait until morning ever brought good news. She typed a response. My apartment, 20 minutes. James arrived in 18, still wearing the same sitao from earlier, tie loosened face, carrying the expression of someone who'd seen something he wished he could unsee. Victoria poured him coffee without asking, gestured to the chair opposite hers. Tell me. James pulled a tablet from his briefcase, brought up photographs that made Victoria's stomach clench. Close-ups of hydraulic lines, metal components, mechanical systems she didn't understand but could recognize as wrong even in her ignorance. Your plane didn't fail. It was sabotaged. Someone cut the primary and backup hydraulic lines. Precise cuts made with knowledge of exactly where the system would be most vulnerable. This wasn't random. Whoever did this knew the aircraft inside and out. Victoria's hands found the edge of the table, gripped hard. Who had access? That's where it gets complicated. The plane was hangared at our private facility. Access is restricted to senior executives and certified maintenance crew. I pulled the logs. He swiped to a new screen, a list of names with timestamps. 17 people entered that hangar in the 48 hours before your flight. 16 are maintenance staff who've been with us for years, all cleared background checks, no financial irregularities. And the 17th, James met her eyes. Richard Kane, logged in at 2:15 a.m. the night before your flight, stayed 47 minutes. Security cameras show him entering alone, leaving alone. The system logs show he accessed the maintenance bay where your aircraft was stored. The words landed like physical blows. Victoria's uncle, her father's brother, the man who'd taught her how to read quarterly reports when she was 12, who'd stood beside her at her father's funeral, who'd handed her the CEO position with a smile and assurances that she had the family's full support. That doesn't prove he sabotaged the plane. No, but combined with the maintenance records showing no other activity in that time frame, and the fact that the cuts were made with tools that require executive authorization to access, it creates reasonable suspicion. Victoria stood, walked to the window, stared out at the city lights blurring through glass still wet with rain. Somewhere out there, her uncle was sleeping peacefully confident that his secrets remained buried, that the niece he'd tried to murder was too naive or too loyal to connect the dots. Send me everything, every log, every photo, every piece of evidence. And James, nobody else sees this, not yet. You're sure if we're right about this, then I need to be certain before I destroy my family's legacy. Give me 48 hours. James nodded, packed his tablet, left with the efficiency of a man who'd learned when not to ask questions. Victoria returned to her dining table, to the personnel files on Marcus Reed, to the crash investigation photos James had emailed her phone. Two separate crimes 6 years apart, connected by hydraulic systems, and a man willing to sacrifice lives for profit. Her uncle had killed Sarah Reed to protect his approval of a flawed design. Now he tried to kill Victoria to prevent her from discovering that original crime. The pattern was clear, brutal, undeniable. She grabbed her phone, found Marcus Reed's number in her contacts, and called before she could second-guess the impulse. He answered on the fourth ring, voice rough with sleep or emotion or both. Ms. Kane, it's almost midnight. I know, I'm sorry, but I need to see you tomorrow morning, the Overlook. 10 a.m. I already told you I'd think about it. This isn't about the USB drive. Well, it is, but there's more. My plane was sabotaged, and I think I know who did it. I think the same person who approved the system that killed your wife tried to kill me to cover it up. Silence stretched across the line, broken only by static and Marcus's controlled breathing. Who? My uncle, Richard Kane. He was in the hangar the night before my flight. He had access, opportunity, and motive. And if I'm right, he's not going to stop. Not while there's evidence out there that could expose him. More silence, then quiet and deadly serious. What do you need from me? Everything you have, tomorrow, 10 a.m., and Marcus, be careful. If he's willing to kill me, he won't hesitate with you or your son. She ended the call before he could respond, before the weight of what she'd just asked could make her reconsider. Richard had already tried to murder her once. He'd succeeded in killing Sarah Reed. If he knew Marcus had evidence, knew Victoria was investigating, he'd escalate. Men like Richard always escalated when cornered. Victoria opened her laptop, drafted an email to the most aggressive private investigator in Seattle, attached every file on Richard Kane she could access. Then she looked at the send button and hesitated. Once she pressed it, there was no going back. No pretending she didn't know, no family loyalty to hide behind, no corporate unity to maintain. Just the truth and whatever consequences it brought. She hit send. 3 days later, Marcus's phone rang at 9:43 p.m. Dylan had been asleep for an hour, the cabin quiet except for the wood stove's crackle and the valley's night sounds. Filtering through windows, Marcus always left slightly open to catch the mountain air. Unknown number. Marcus stared at it, counting rings, debating whether answering would invite more trouble than ignoring. On the fifth ring, he picked up. Victoria's voice, calm and professional, and utterly at odds with the late hour. Mr. Reed, this is Victoria Kane. How did you get this number? I have resources. I need to see you tonight. It's important. Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. I don't think that's a good idea. The press is already all over me, and meeting you in secret isn't going to help. Your son. The two words cut through his objections like a blade. Dylan, he has asthma, doesn't he? Ice flooded Marcus's veins. What are you talking about? A crash erupted from Dylan's room, followed by a sound that would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. His son, choking, gasping, fighting for air that wouldn't come. Marcus dropped the phone and ran. Dylan sat upright in bed, hands clutching his chest, face pale and slick with sweat, mouth open in desperate silent scream. Each attempted breath came as a wheeze, high-pitched and terrified, the sound of lungs that had forgotten how to function. The inhaler sat on the nightstand where it always lived. Marcus grabbed it, shook it hard, pressed it to Dylan's lips. Nothing. He shook it again, tried again. Empty. Panic clawed at his throat, but he shoved it down, tore through the bathroom cabinet, searching for the backup inhaler he knew he had refilled last month. Gone. The prescription bottle sat empty, cap-off contents vanished. Dylan's lips were turning blue. His breaths came shorter, shallower, each one a smaller victory against the constriction crushing his airways. Marcus scooped him up, felt how light his son was, despite 9 years of growth, felt the too rapid heartbeat against his chest. He ran for the front door. Headlights flooded the driveway before he reached it. The black Cadillac skidded to a stop in a spray of gravel. Victoria jumped from the driver's seat, hair wild, still wearing what looked like pajamas under a hastily thrown-on jacket. "Get in, now!" Marcus didn't hesitate, didn't question how she'd known or why she was here. He climbed into the back seat, cradling Dylan against his chest, trying to time his own breathing to slow and steady in hopes his son's body would mimic it. Victoria was already moving before Marcus had the door closed. The valley road was narrow, winding, designed for careful navigation, not desperate speed. Victoria took it at 70 headlights, cutting through darkness, tires finding traction on gravel that should have spun them into trees. Dylan's breathing grew more labored with each passing second, each wheeze quieter than the last, and Marcus heard himself talking in a continuous stream of reassurance that fooled neither of them. "Stay with me, buddy. We're almost there. Just hold on. Stay with me." The drive to the regional hospital should have taken 40 minutes on a good day. Victoria made it in 25 cutting corners that would have terrified Marcus if he'd had attention to spare for anything except his son's deteriorating condition. They screamed into the emergency entrance, tires squealing, and Victoria was already out and pulling open Marcus's door before the car fully stopped. Nurses materialized with the gurney. Marcus laid Dylan down, watched them swarm him with practiced efficiency, hooking him to monitors, sliding a nebulizer mask over his face. Dylan's eyes found his father's through the plastic, wide and terrified and silently begging for help. Marcus couldn't provide. A doctor in blue scrubs took over young woman with steady hands, already assessing vitals, already adjusting oxygen flow. The nebulizer hissed and Dylan's chest began to rise and fall with something closer to normalcy. Marcus stood frozen in the hallway, every muscle locked, brain unable to process that the crisis was ending, because crisis had been his reality for the last 30 minutes, and bodies didn't release that kind of tension just because someone said it was over. Victoria appeared beside him, soaked from rain that Marcus only now realized had started falling. She didn't speak, didn't offer platitudes, just stood present and solid while Marcus's hands shook and his breathing finally remembered how to work. An hour passed. The doctor emerged from Dylan's room, face tired but no longer urgent. "He's stable. We'll keep him overnight for observation, but he's going to be fine." Was there anything unusual that might have triggered this new detergent, different food, environmental changes? Marcus shook his head, still too rattled to form coherent answers beyond the minimum required. The doctor nodded, made notes on her tablet, and returned to check on other patients cycling through the ER's controlled chaos. Marcus walked into Dylan's room on legs that barely held him upright. His son lay propped against pillows, oxygen mask replaced by a nasal cannula, color slowly returning to his face. Still pale, still fragile, but breathing. Alive. Safe. "Dad," the word came out raspy but clear. "I'm okay." Marcus sat in the chair beside the bed, reached out and took Dylan's hand. Small fingers cool to the touch, squeezing back with surprising strength. "You scared me." "Sorry." "Don't be sorry, just be okay." Dylan's eyes started to close, exhaustion and medication pulling him towards sleep. Marcus stayed hand-wrapped around his son's, watching the monitors track heartbeat and oxygen saturation, watching proof that Dylan was still here, still breathing, still his. Victoria appeared in the doorway. Marcus looked up, suddenly remembering that she'd somehow known to be there, had somehow arrived exactly when needed, had somehow saved Dylan's life the way Marcus had saved hers. "Thank you. Without you, I couldn't have made it in time." She stepped into the room, stopped at the foot of Dylan's bed, looked at the boy with something Marcus couldn't quite name. Regret, maybe, or recognition of how easily this could have gone differently. "You're not alone in this. Not anymore." Marcus released Dylan's hand, gently stood, and crossed to where his jacket hung over the visitor chair. From the inside pocket, he pulled the USB drive he'd been carrying for 3 days, unable to commit to giving it to Victoria, but unable to leave it at the cabin where Dylan might find it and ask questions Marcus wasn't ready to answer. He held it out. Victoria took it, fingers closing around the small piece of plastic that contained enough evidence to destroy Kane Aerospace and everyone associated with it. Her eyes met his question, unspoken but clear. "Why now?" "Because you were right. Hiding won't protect him. The only way to keep Dylan safe is to end this completely, whatever it takes." She nodded, slipped the drive into her pocket. "Then I will, I promise." Victoria woke to her phone's insistent vibration at 2:17 a.m., the kind of hour that never brought good news. The email notification glowed harsh against the darkness of her penthouse bedroom, sender listed as anonymous, subject line blank. She almost deleted it reflexively, another piece of digital noise in an inbox already drowning in corporate communications and media inquiries. Something made her open it instead. The message contained no text, just a photograph, high resolution, taken with a telephoto lens from distance. Dylan Reed on his elementary school playground, circled in red marker digital annotation, precise and deliberate. Below the image, a single line, "Some secrets should stay buried." Victoria's hands went cold. She grabbed her phone, dialed Marcus's number with fingers that wanted to shake, but refused. He answered on the first ring, voice alert, despite the hour, a man who'd learned that late-night calls meant crisis. "What's wrong?" No preamble, no pleasantries. Straight to the threat, because that's what their relationship had become, born in disaster, sustained by shared danger. "Someone sent me a photo of Dylan, at school, circled like a target, with a message threatening him if I don't back off." The silence that followed carried weight, Marcus processing implications, calculating risks, deciding whether the world had finally pushed him past the point where caution mattered more than retaliation. "Can you trace it?" "Already working on it. Lisa Chen, the investigator I hired, she's got software that can track routing even through VPNs. Give me an hour. I'm pulling him from school, today, until this is over." Victoria wanted to argue, to say that hiding wouldn't solve anything, but she'd been the one arguing for exposure, and now someone had weaponized her investigation against a 9-year-old boy. "I'm sending security to your cabin. Armed, professional. They'll be there by dawn." "I don't want—" "This isn't charity, Marcus. It's accountability. My uncle is threatening your son because of evidence I asked you to provide. That makes Dylan's safety my responsibility." She ended the call before he could argue further, immediately dialed Lisa Chen, despite the ungodly hour. The investigator answered, sharp and awake, the kind of person who kept irregular hours professionally. "I need an email traced. Priority. And Lisa, whoever sent this has resources. They're not some amateur trying to scare me with stock threats. Send it. I'll have an answer in 2 hours, maybe less." Victoria forwarded the message, then sat in her bed, staring at Dylan's image, at the red circle turning a child into a symbol, into collateral damage in a war he hadn't chosen. Richard had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Sabotaging aircraft was business, however twisted. Threatening children was something else entirely. Something that transformed this from corporate crime into personal vendetta. Her phone rang 90 minutes later. Lisa's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd found exactly what she'd been hunting. "Got it. Email routed through 3 VPN servers, encrypted relay, the whole sophisticated setup. But your guy made a mistake. The source IP traces back to Kane Aerospace headquarters executive floor. Building security logs show only one person with access at that hour." Victoria already knew the answer, but asked anyway. "Who?" "Richard Kane, logged in at 1:47 a.m. with his executive credentials. Stayed on the system for 14 minutes. The email was sent at 1:53. Evidence, concrete, traceable, undeniable. Not circumstantial connections or suspicious timing, but direct proof that Richard had threatened a child to protect his secrets." Victoria felt something shift inside her chest, the last vestige of family loyalty burning away, leaving only cold determination. "Send me everything, every log, every screenshot, every piece of digital trail. And Lisa, I need you to meet me at the district attorney's office, first thing tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. You're really doing this, going after your own uncle." "He stopped being my uncle when he tried to kill me, when he threatened a child. Now he's just a criminal who happens to share my last name." Dawn came with rain, the kind of persistent Seattle drizzle that turned the world gray and soft. Victoria, dressed in her most severe suit armor, disguised as professional attire, and drove to the DA's office, carrying a briefcase that had grown heavier with each document added. Lisa Chen met her in the lobby, tablet tucked under one arm, expression grim. The district attorney, Margaret Chen, Lisa's older sister, which explained how Victoria had gotten the appointment, on 12 hours' notice studied the evidence spread across her conference table, with the focused intensity of a prosecutor who'd built her career on corporate accountability cases. 48 years old, silver threading through black hair, she wore pulled back severely, reading glasses perched on her nose as she scrolled through Marcus's USB files. "This is damning. The emails alone establish criminal negligence. Add the crash investigation showing sabotage, the threatening email with digital fingerprints leading directly to Richard Kane, and you've got a pattern. Conspiracy to commit murder, witness intimidation, corporate fraud. Margaret looked up. But corporate cases take time. Discovery depositions, legal challenges. We're talking months minimum, possibly years. Victoria leaned forward. I don't have months. He's already threatened a child. Next time he might not stop at threats. Then we need to force his hand, make him incriminate himself publicly on record where there's no walking it back. The board meeting, Thursday morning, 8 a.m. Every executive will be there plus legal counsel. It's already scheduled to address the crash investigation findings. Margaret's expression sharpened. You present the evidence there, in front of witnesses. Get him defensive angry. People like Richard Kane, men who have operated with impunity for decades, they don't know how to stay silent when challenged. He'll want to justify himself and explain why his decisions made sense. And if he doesn't take the bait, then we pursue this through traditional channels and hope he doesn't escalate before we can arrest him. But my instinct says he'll talk. Pride always makes them talk. Lisa pulled a small device from her bag, sleek and professional, no larger than a button. We'll wire you. Audio and video broadcasting to a secure server. Everything he says gets recorded, time-stamped, admissible in court. Victoria took the device, felt its weight in her palm. Such a small thing to carry the weight of family destruction. What about the threat to Dylan Reed? Can we charge him with that now? Margaret shook her head. Threatening email is serious, but not enough for immediate arrest, not for someone with Richard's resources and legal team. He'd be out on bail before we finish the paperwork. Better to use it as leverage, part of the larger pattern. When we move with everything at once, no second chances. They spent 3 hours planning the confrontation like generals preparing for battle. Every possible response Richard might have, every deflection, every attempt to shift blame or minimize culpability. Victoria would need to stay calm, professional, give him room to hang himself with his own words. Margaret would station federal agents in the building ready to move the moment Victoria gave the signal, touching her watch, a gesture natural enough to seem unconscious, but distinct enough to be unmistakable. One more thing. Margaret closed her legal pad, expression serious. Once you do this, there's no going back. Your company's reputation will take massive hits. Stock prices will crater. Board members will resign. Some of them might face charges themselves for failure to oversee. You're burning down everything your father built. Victoria thought about Sarah Reed, about Dylan struggling to breathe, about the years Marcus had spent in isolation because speaking truth had cost him everything. My father built an aerospace company. Richard corrupted it into something that kills people for profit margins. Better it burns than continues killing. Margaret nodded, once respect clear in her expression. Thursday morning, we'll be ready. Marcus spent the day before the board meeting teaching Dylan how to properly balance the model airplane they'd been constructing for weeks. The cabin felt smaller, with 2 security guards stationed outside, professionals Victoria had hired, who'd introduced themselves with the minimum courtesy required before taking up positions that offered clear sightlines of all approaches. Dylan had asked about them once, nervous eyes tracking their presence through the window. Marcus had kept his explanation simple. Just some extra protection while things settled down. Nothing to worry about. The boy seemed to accept it, or at least pretend to, returning his focus to the delicate work of attaching wings to fuselage with glue that required steady hands and patience. They worked in companionable silence, the kind of peace that felt fragile now, temporary borrowed time, before everything changed again. Dad, Dylan's voice came quiet, careful. When this is over, will things go back to normal? Marcus set down the piece he'd been sanding, considered lying, considered the kind of comforting falsehood parents offer children to shield them from hard truths. But Dylan had earned honesty, had survived too much to be patronized with false assurances. I don't think normal exists anymore, but we'll find something better. Something that doesn't require hiding or being afraid. Because you're fighting back now. Because we're fighting back together. Dylan smiled, small and tentative but genuine, and returned to his work. They spent the afternoon building something fragile and beautiful, something that would fly if they did it correctly, if they trusted the engineering and the physics and their own careful hands. As evening approached, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Simple, direct, tomorrow morning. Everything ends or everything begins. Thank you for trusting me. He didn't respond, just set the phone down and watched his son work memorizing this moment before the world shifted again. The Kane Aerospace conference room occupied prime real estate on the 40th floor, glass walls offering panoramic views of Seattle's skyline and Puget Sound stretching gray toward distant mountains. By 7:45 Thursday morning, every seat around the massive table was filled. Executives in suits that cost more than most people's monthly salary, lawyers with briefcases opened, and tablets glowing board members who'd served since before Victoria was born. Richard Kane sat at the head of the table, silver hair, perfectly styled navy suit, immaculate fingers steepled in the posture of a man completely confident in his control of the room and everyone in it. He smiled when Victoria entered, the benevolent uncle, welcoming his niece to the meeting he'd called to address the uncomfortable business of her plane crash. Victoria, good. Please sit. Let's keep this efficient. She remained standing, briefcase in one hand, tablet in the other, the small recording device Lisa had fitted to her lapel that morning, invisible but present, broadcasting every word to Margaret Chen and two federal agents waiting 3 floors below. I agree. Efficiency matters when dealing with criminal conspiracy. The room went silent. Richard's smile didn't falter, but something shifted behind his eyes, recognition that the script had deviated from expectations. Victoria connected her tablet to the room's display system. The massive screen flickered to life, showing an email dated 6 years and 4 months earlier. Subject line, hydraulic failure risk. Immediate action required. Sender Marcus Reed. Murmurs rippled through the assembled executives. Richard leaned back in his chair, expression carefully neutral, now calculating. Victoria clicked to the next slide. A photograph of cracked hydraulic components, technical specifications in red, highlighting the failure points Marcus had identified. Then another email, this one, Richard's response, his words displayed in 40-point font for everyone to read. Bury this. We're not recalling 50 aircraft over a minor flaw. Production continues as scheduled. One board member stood abruptly, face pale, gathering papers with shaking hands. She walked out without a word. Another followed 30 seconds later. Within 2 minutes, half the room had emptied, executives and lawyers fleeing like rats from a sinking ship, wanting no association with what was clearly about to become a public disaster. Richard's jaw tightened, but he maintained composure, voice steady when he spoke. Those documents are out of context. Manufacturing decisions require balancing multiple factors, safety, cost, timeline. We followed all regulatory protocols. Victoria advanced to the next slide. The Nevada test site incident report. 1 civilian fatality. Sarah Reed, wife of Marcus Reed, mother of Dylan Reed, age 3. Survived by husband and son. You followed protocols by ignoring 7 separate warnings from your senior engineer. You balanced factors by approving a system you knew would fail. And when it did fail, when it killed someone, you fired the man who tried to stop it and paid his family to stay quiet. Another board member stood, closed his folder with decisive finality, walked toward the exit. Richard's composure cracked fractionally, fingers unclenching from their steeple, pressing flat against the table. Accidents happen in aerospace development. It's tragic but inevitable. We provided appropriate compensation. Compensation, Victoria's voice cut sharp. You mean hush money. You mean the settlement you paired with a non-disclosure agreement that prevented Marcus Reed from ever working in his field again. She clicked to a new document. The crash investigation from her own plane, technical photographs showing hydraulic lines cut with precision, security logs showing Richard's access to the hangar at 2:15 a.m. the night before her flight. You sabotaged my aircraft, your own niece's plane. You tried to murder me to prevent me from discovering what you did to Sarah Reed. Richard stood now, both hands on the table, face flushing red. You don't know what you're talking about. I was checking maintenance schedules, ensuring proper protocols. At 2 in the morning for 47 minutes with cutting tools that required executive authorization to access. The remaining executives were leaving now, a steady exodus, chairs pushing back, briefcases snapping shut. the sound of professional abandonment. Within another minute, only Richard and Victoria remained facing each other across the conference table like duelists, measuring distance. Richard's voice dropped low, intimate, threatening. You're destroying this company, everything your father built, everything our family represents. For what? Some engineer who couldn't follow chain of command, some accident that happened years ago. For accountability, for justice, for making sure it never happens again. Justice? Richard laughed, bitter and harsh. You're a child playing at being CEO. You have no idea what it takes to run a company this size, to make the hard decisions that keep thousands of people employed. Sometimes sacrifices are necessary. Sometimes the individual matters less than the whole. Victoria felt the weight of the recording device against her chest, felt Margaret Chen and the federal agents listening 3 floors below, felt the moment crystallizing into something that couldn't be undone. So you admit it. You knew the system was flawed. You approved it anyway. You sacrificed Sarah Reed for profit margins. I did what any rational executive would do. The recall would have cost $2.3 billion, would have bankrupted us. I made the choice that saved the company, that protected jobs, that maintained our market position. And when I started investigating, when I started asking questions about old personnel files, Richard's expression twisted into something ugly. You were going to destroy everything, audit every decision, second guess every choice I made to keep this company viable. I built Kane Aerospace into what it is today. Not your father's dreams, not your naive idealism, my decisions, my vision. So you tried to kill me. I tried to protect what matters, the company, the legacy, the future. You were an obstacle that needed removing. The words hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. Richard seemed to realize what he'd said, what he'd admitted, but the words couldn't be retrieved any more than bullets could be unfired. Victoria touched her watch, the prearranged signal, and watched her uncle's face cycle through understanding to rage to something approaching fear. The conference room doors opened. Margaret Chen entered, flanked by 2 federal agents' badges, visible expressions professionally neutral. Richard looked between them, and Victoria comprehension finally dawning that this had been orchestrated, that he'd walked into a trap baited with his own pride. Richard Kane, you're under arrest for attempted murder conspiracy to commit murder, corporate negligence, resulting in death in witness intimidation. You have the right to remain silent. Richard's face went from red to white. You can't do this. I'm a board member. I have rights. I have lawyers. The agent cuffing his wrist spoke without emotion. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. I know my rights. Victoria, stop this. Your family. She met his eyes without flinching. You stopped being family when you chose money over lives, when you threatened a child. Now you're just a criminal who happens to share my last name. They led him away, hands cuffed behind his back, expensive suit, suddenly looking like costume rather than armor. His protest faded down the hallway, diminishing into silence that felt clean, somehow purifying the removal of rot that had been poisoning everything. Victoria stood alone in the empty conference room, surrounded by abandoned chairs and forgotten briefcases, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness exactly, not satisfaction, but the absence of weight, the lifting of pressure she'd been carrying without acknowledging its presence. Her phone buzzed. Marcus brief and to the point. I saw the news. Is it over? She typed her response carefully. The arrest is over. The healing starts now. Outside the building, reporters had gathered in a feeding frenzy, cameras and microphones forming a gauntlet Victoria would need to traverse. She descended in the elevator alone, gathering composure, preparing for the performance that would define how this story got told. The glass doors opened and the questions hit like physical assault, overlapping voices demanding answers. Explanations, sound bites that would play on loop across every news channel. Victoria stopped at the top of the entrance steps, waiting for the noise to settle into something approaching order. When she spoke, her voice carried clear and firm, the voice of someone who'd made peace with necessary destruction. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. The evidence speaks for itself. I will cooperate fully with all investigations into Kane Aerospace's safety practices, both past and present. My priority now is ensuring this company earns back the public trust it betrayed. A reporter pushed forward, aggressive. What about Richard Kane, your own uncle? That's for the authorities to determine. I've provided them with everything they need. Will you remain as CEO? Victoria paused, the question hitting territory she hadn't fully decided. I will stay long enough to implement the changes necessary to prevent this from ever happening again. After that, the board will decide Kane Aerospace's future leadership. Today isn't about my career, it's about accountability. She turned and walked to her car, ignoring the follow-up questions, the demands for more details, the hunger for drama that would never be satisfied. Inside the vehicle, doors closed against the noise. She allowed herself one moment of trembling before starting the engine and driving away. Marcus watched the press conference on his laptop, Dylan beside him on the couch, both of them processing the surreal experience of seeing their private tragedy become public vindication. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen read, Kane Aerospace CEO exposes uncle in fatal cover-up scandal. His phone rang steadily for the next hour. Carl from the general store, apologetic and ashamed. Ray from the garage, offering not just his job back, but a raise and an apology for doubting. Neighbors he barely knew, parents from Dylan's school, people wanting to express support or condolence, or some complicated mixture of both, now that the narrative had shifted from suspicion to heroism. He let most calls go to voicemail, not ready to perform gratitude or acceptance, not ready to pretend that public opinion mattered when it had proven so fickle, so easily manipulated. Only when Victoria's name appeared on the caller ID did he answer. How are you holding up? Her voice sounded tired but steady, the exhaustion of someone who'd survived something demanding rather than something traumatic. I should be asking you that question. You're the one who just had your entire past aired on national television. At least now they're telling the truth about it. That's something. Silence stretched, comfortable rather than awkward, two people who'd earned the right to shared quiet. I'm coming to the valley tomorrow, if that's all right. I have something to discuss. Something important. Marcus glanced at Dylan, who'd returned to his model airplane, seemingly unaffected by the media circus swirling around them. We'll be here. Victoria arrived the next afternoon driving a rental sedan instead of a Cadillac, wearing jeans and a sweater, instead of business armor, carrying a bag of groceries like a neighbor dropping by, rather than a billionaire CEO. Dylan answered the door, face lighting with recognition and something approaching affection. You came back, Victoria smiled, genuine warmth transforming her features from corporate to human. I promised, didn't I? They ate dinner at the small kitchen table, simple food prepared together, pasta and salad and garlic bread that Dylan insisted on making despite his tendency to use excessive butter. Conversation flowed easier than Marcus expected, stories and laughter mixing with the serious undercurrent of everything that had brought them to this point. After Dylan went to bed, Victoria and Marcus sat on the porch with coffee, watching stars emerge above the valley's dark embrace. The news vans had departed the reporters, finding fresher disasters to document, leaving Pine Ridge Valley to return to its customary obscurity. There's a position opening at Kane Aerospace. Victoria spoke without looking at him, eyes fixed on the distant mountains. Head of Safety and Compliance. Full authority to implement whatever changes you deem necessary. No executive override, no budget constraints, complete autonomy to rebuild our safety protocols from the ground up. Marcus turned the coffee mug in his hands, feeling its warmth, considering futures he'd stopped allowing himself to imagine. I don't know if I'm ready for that world again. You don't have to decide now. But Marcus, you're the only person I trust to do this right. The only one who understands what failure costs because you've paid that price. The only one who won't compromise safety for convenience. And if I say no, then I'll respect that decision and find someone else. But I hope you won't, because this is how we honor Sarah. Not with settlements or memorials, but by making sure no other family suffers what you've suffered. The words landed with the weight of truth Marcus couldn't deny. Sarah had believed in progress and humanity's reach for something better, in the potential of engineering to improve lives rather than end them. Working to prevent future tragedies felt more like honoring her memory than hiding in the mountains ever had. Let me think about it. Talk it over with Dylan. This affects him as much as me. Victoria nodded, stood to leave. At the door, she turned back, moonlight catching the silver in her hair. That stress had added over the past weeks. Thank you, Marcus, for trusting me, for giving me the chance to do the right thing. You gave me justice. That's not something I expected to ever receive. We gave each other something better than justice. We gave each other the truth. 1 year later, the Hale Safety Foundation opened in a renovated building that prioritized natural light and sustainable materials over corporate intimidation. The ceremony drew aerospace engineers and safety advocates, families of crash victims, and whistleblowers who'd been silent students studying fields where speaking truth could cost everything, reporters who'd followed the Kane Aerospace story and wanted to see its resolution. Victoria stood at the podium, older somehow, despite only 12 months passing, the experience of dismantling corporate corruption having aged her in ways that transcended time. She wore a sharp blazer but softer styling her hair, down her expression open rather than guarded. A year ago, I almost died. Not because of bad luck or mechanical failure, but because someone in a position of power chose profit over safety, chose silence over accountability, chose convenience over conscience. She paused, letting the words settle her eyes, finding Marcus in the front row. Dylan sat beside him in a button-down shirt, looking uncomfortable in formal clothes, but trying anyway. One man chose differently. 6 years ago, Marcus Reed warned my company about a critical flaw that would cost lives. He did everything right, followed protocols, documented concerns, escalated through proper channels. And for that, he lost his job. He lost his wife in the very accident he tried to prevent. He lost everything except his integrity. Applause erupted, people rising to their feet, recognition finally given to suffering that had been invisible for too long. Marcus stood reluctantly, acknowledging the recognition with a brief nod before sitting again, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, but accepting it as necessary. This foundation exists because of people like him, people who refuse to stay silent when they see something wrong, who believe that doing the right thing matters even when it costs them everything. We will support whistleblowers, fund independent safety research, and ensure that no engineer ever again faces the choice between their career and their conscience. The ceremony continued for another 2 hours, speeches and testimonials, the unveiling of safety initiatives funded by Victoria's personal fortune and staffed by engineers who'd been silenced by other companies and now had platform to speak freely. Headlines would proclaim it, redemption transformation, corporate accountability finally achieved. But Marcus understood it as something simpler, people trying to be slightly better than they'd been before. They returned to Pine Ridge Valley that afternoon, the three of them, Marcus, Dylan, and Victoria, who'd somehow become a fixed presence in their lives, not quite family, but something close enough to matter. Marcus launched the wooden boat while Dylan carried the model airplane they'd finally perfected, sleek silver with perfect aerodynamics, named the Sarah, in careful lettering along the fuselage. Dylan set it on the water's surface, gave it a gentle push. For a moment, it simply floated, bobbing on small waves. Then wind caught the wings and it began to glide forward, moving with the grace of something designed correctly, something that understood flight, not as defiance of gravity, but as conversation with it. Victoria stood at the shore, hands in her pockets, watching the model plane trace lazy circles across the lake. I used to think power was about control, about being the one who made decisions, who shaped outcomes, who commanded respect through position. Marcus joined her, leaving Dylan to follow his creation's progress with boyish enthusiasm. And now I think it's about letting go, about trusting other people to do what's right, about building systems that work without requiring one person to be heroic. The lake shimmered in afternoon light, the same lake where everything had started, where a jet had fallen and a man had dove without hesitation, and two lives had collided in ways neither could have predicted. The water looked peaceful now, carrying no trace of disaster, reflecting only sky and mountains and possibility. The past isn't erased, Victoria said quietly. The pain isn't gone. Sarah isn't coming back. The years you spent isolated, the damage to your career, Dylan's trauma, none of that disappears because we held people accountable. Marcus watched his son wade into shallow water, chasing the model airplane with pure joy, unmarred by everything that had happened. No, but the future feels possible again. That's something. Victoria turned to face him fully. I owe you more than I can ever repay. You saved my life, gave me evidence that destroyed my family's legacy, trusted me when you had every reason not to. You gave me something I'd stopped believing existed. You proved the system could work, that truth mattered, that justice was more than just a word we use to feel better about unfairness. That's worth more than you know. The sun began its descent toward the western ridge, painting the valley in shades of amber and gold, the light catching on water in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost designed. Dylan ran back from the shore shoes, soaked face flushed with happiness that only 9-year-olds could sustain after everything he'd survived. Dad, did you see it flew perfectly, just like you said it would? Marcus pulled his son close, felt the solid warmth of him, the reality of survival and continuation, and the stubborn human insistence on building something beautiful even from wreckage. I saw. You did excellent work. The three of them stood at the lake's edge as evening approached, watching light transform water into something precious, something worth protecting, something that deserved better than the carelessness that had nearly destroyed it. They'd all been pulled from different kinds of drowning, all saved each other in ways that mattered more than dramatic rescues. And if the future still carried uncertainty, still promised challenges, neither could predict. At least they'd face it with truth as foundation rather than lies as shelter. The model airplane continued its journey across the lake, catching light that made it look almost alive, a small testament to what careful engineering and patient love could create. Tomorrow would bring new complications, ongoing investigations, the slow grinding work of institutional reform. But for now, in this moment, they had peace. They had each other. They had the kind of hope that didn't require ignorance, the kind earned through survival rather than granted through privilege. And on the water, the light looked like promise, keeping itself.